it's a little tough. We've wiped out everybody.
How does Donald Trump get out of the war in Iran? On Monday, he said there was progress to end the conflict.
We have major points of agreement. I would say almost all points of agreement.
This isn't quite the end of the war, but political pressure is mounting for him to find an off-ramp.
We'll at some point very, very soon meet. We're doing a 5-day period. We'll see how that goes. And if it goes well, we're going to end up with settling this. Otherwise, we'll just keep bombing our little hearts out.
Today on the show, what are the choices facing the president and how could he end the war? I'm Tristan Redman, and you're watching The Global Story on YouTube. And a quick note, this episode was recorded on Sunday afternoon. The picture on Monday is changing, but the fundamental choices that Donald Trump faces about how to end the war remain the same. We're joined by the BBC's Joe Inwood and BBC Persian's Ghoncheh Habibiazad. Delighted to have you both with us. You've been with us before on The Global Story, but could you introduce yourself once more for listeners, please?
Lovely to be with you. So yeah, I'm Joe Inwood. I'm the BBC's world news correspondent, and my job is to try and digest all of the things that are happening at any point in the world. At the moment, a lot of that is focused, of course, on the Middle East. Ghoncheh and I work together very often. I try and digest what's happening inside Iran and explain it, and I can only do that through the work that Ghoncheh and her colleagues do.
Thank you so much, Joe. And I'm Ghoncheh Habibiazad, and I work for BBC's Persian service in its forensic team. But I also come from a monitoring background in the BBC, and we monitored Iranian media on a daily basis, from social media to Iranian outlets to Iranian state TV, everywhere. And I still do that.
I think it's worth telling people there are huge numbers of different sections of the BBC, all these different teams working around the world, producing amazing work. And it's only through the sort of work that they do that the gobs on a stick like me that stand in front of the camera actually know what to say, and we can be well informed.
I should say for our American listeners that a gob on a stick. Well, explain to us what a gob on a stick is, Joe.
It's a jokingly derogatory term for somebody that just pops up on television and gives you an opinion on something. Obviously, I do more than that.
You're not a gob on a stick, Joe. You're much more than that. It was so good to have you with us as a duo, Ghoncheh and Joe. Escalation seems to be the order of the day, which stands in pretty stark contrast to what Donald Trump is saying, which is that he's looking for ways to wind up the conflict. Joe, if he wants an off-ramp, what are the possible off-ramps available to him?
One of the things that people are talking about is the idea that if they want to bring this down, what you need to do is you need to force your enemy into a position where they feel they have to negotiate. That's where the phrase escalate to de-escalate comes from. What you do is, rather than keep a kind of continual pressure as it is, you ramp up, you do something which suddenly puts them on the back foot. Because at the moment, the Iranians are under severe pressure, no doubt, but they are firing missiles back. The suggestion is what they might be looking at doing is putting some sort of ground force in. I mean, there are the reports of US Marines, many thousands of them, on the way to the region. They could do something like, for example, occupy Karg Island. Now, Karg Island is a key Iranian oil distribution, oil export island. It's right up at the north of the Persian Arabian Gulf. And the suggestion is that you capture that, and suddenly that puts an economic pressure, gives you an economic lever over the regime, which previously you might not have had. That's an option, but then it's very, very foreseeable that starts to escalate further and further, and you lose control. Once you start to put boots on the ground, the risk to you losing soldiers, the risk to it spiraling increases exponentially. I mean, Karg Island is one option. The other thing people talk about is trying to do something limited along the coast to try and get rid of the naval threat. But all of these will come with incredible risks, and eventually it ends with marching your troops into Tehran, and that's just inconceivable. And so it's difficult to see what the escalate to de-escalate option would be, but the Americans haven't ruled it out.
Well, at the opposite end of the spectrum, there is another option, which is declare victory and walk away, or at least try to just walk away. What would that actually look like? And Ghoncheh, in particular, for people on the ground inside Iran, What would come next if that were to happen?
Well, it's a very tricky situation right now to know what's even happening inside the country. When I see Iran's supreme leader, Iran's third supreme leader, all we have seen so far from him have been written messages so far. We haven't seen him since his succession early in March. And that has led to some people speculating about his whereabouts, what he's doing. Mojtaba Khamenei, who is son of Iran's late supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has been a man in the shadows. He has been regarded as someone who has got influence over Iran's military, IRGC, and different parts, but we don't know much about him. And that has been the issue.
Is it fair to say, Ghoncheh, that the one thing that we do know from the regime is that they probably would not just end this conflict if the Americans said that they were walking away? My guess is probably the Iranians say, well, you're finished, but we're not. I think most analysts would feel that if the Americans walked away and if the Iranian regime is still in place, is still able to fire missiles and still decides it would like to and disrupt shipping, well, there's very, very few people who could with a straight face call that a victory for the USA.
You're saying that the risk is that the missile attacks from Iran could continue to happen, for example, on Gulf state neighbors and or Israel after the Americans had pulled out. Is that what you're saying?
Why would they stop? Think about the damage done to Iran, to its infrastructure, to its people, the numbers who've been killed. Imagine the Americans say, we're done, we're walking away, we're declaring victory. Why would the Iranians go, okay, fine, no problem at all? The thing the Iranians have said they want to achieve is to drive the Americans from the Middle East, to see all bases removed from the Middle East. In war, both sides get a vote. And as long as the Iranians still have the capacity to fire missiles, and as we've seen over this weekend, they still have that capability, as long as they have that, they have got a vote. And my suspicion would be that the Americans could declare whatever they liked. The Iranians would still be able to vote, and they would do it by targeting shipping, by carrying on their strikes if they wanted to.
At the beginning of the war, one of the prognoses that you might hear from various different corners was the so-called Venezuela model of conflict, in which the United States might go in, regime change, install a new person in Venezuela. It was Delcy Rodriguez, who was seen as a US-friendly head of state. You don't hear so much about that possible solution anymore when it comes to Iran. Joe, is that dead and buried at this point as an end game?
It's worth pointing out that in terms of what the end game was, it's always been a little, if not opaque from the United States, but a little confused, shall we say. It is, let's be honest, Donald Trump puts out many messages and we often get a slightly confused picture. I don't think Washington's thinking would have ever been that that was going to be possible, mainly because of the nature of the Iranian regime. It is very, very different from that in Venezuela, far less brittle, far more entrenched. It would never be a possibility that you'd get a compliant regime in Tehran. I mean, when Donald Trump said we should have a say in who the supreme leader is, that struck me as either, if not said in jest, then fairly laughable. And I think it's fair to say, isn't it, Ghoncheh, that anyone who tried to go along with what the United States wanted in Tehran would not survive very long at the hands of the IRGC.
No, Iran's system of power is very complex. We have Iranian supreme leader as the head of the state, but at the same time, the IRGC is very powerful and they have got hundreds of thousands of forces within the establishment, and they are very much loyal to the system. We are seeing on state media that every night they're coming out to the streets of Tehran and other cities, those who are with the establishment, to rally for them. And some of those that I've been talking to, they're scared because they're saying the establishment has got nothing to lose. So if we come out to the streets to protest, there is a chance that we are going to be killed. So it seems like even though the Iranian establishment has been severely weakened, they still have loads of supporters.
And the evidence is that the government and security apparatus is still intact and in place. Is that right?
Iran has lost several of its officials and military commanders, But they have been saying repeatedly that for every person killed, we have got the replacement. And for the replacement that has been killed or will be killed, we have got another replacement.
Joe, we haven't really talked yet about the other major protagonist in the conflict, which is Israel. Are we getting to the point now where Israel's view of the endpoint of the conflict and the United States are really starting to diverge?
There are, of course, overlaps between what the US wants and the Israelis want. Both of them would, I'm sure, quite sincerely want the Iranians not to have a ballistic missile threat, the Iranians not to have a nuclear program. But the US has a much stronger vested interest in there not being long-term chaos in around that region, around the Straits of Hormuz. Basically, the Americans are more concerned about the overspill to their Gulf Arab allies, for example. Now, I'm sure Israel might contest this, but lots of analysts say that the position of the Netanyahu government, for example, and I've heard quite a few people suggest this, that if they ended up with chaos, with destabilization in Iran, well, that actually isn't necessarily, from Israel's perspective, a disastrous outcome. For Israel, certainly they argue, many of them feel, that Iran poses an existential threat. And that's why, from their point of view, their concern, Benjamin Netanyahu has wanted to have this war for decades. The Americans don't view Iran in exactly the same way. And so we are seeing that divergence. In short, in the long run, the Americans are not going to want to see the kind of destabilization we're currently seeing. The Israelis seem to be much more relaxed, or certainly give the impression that their concern is in stopping what they see as the Iranian threat, really, whatever the cost.
This is a conflict which is potentially existential for the Iranian government, potentially existential for the Israeli government. What about for the United States and Donald Trump?
For Donald Trump, politically existential is a really interesting question. For him to come to power, having said, if you elect Kamala Harris, there will be war with Iran, and now start what is widely seen as a war of choice, a war that many people think did not need to happen with Iran, and to go deeper and deeper into it, is causing real problems in his base. We've seen people like Megyn Kelly, the former Fox News presenter, Tucker Carlson, people we saw, Joe Kent, who was his former top kind of security official, resigning and saying, I cannot in good conscience support this government, this war did not need to start. We are starting to see fractures within his coalition. And so Donald Trump, of course, is always going to have diehard supporters. He famously said that he could walk into Times Square, shoot somebody, and they'd still support him, I think was the approximate quote. There will be people that will always back him. But I think there's an increasing number that are starting to see this war as a betrayal of the things that he came to power promising to prevent.
Well, Ghoncheh, the moral case for starting the war against Iran was that it would be an opportunity to overthrow a government which had carried out a brutal crackdown on civilian protesters just a few months earlier on. Are people in Iran better off or worse off today than they were when the war started?
Well, I can't say for sure how they are right now. This is putting economic pressure on people as well. So many relied on the internet, so many relied on it for making money in Iran, and now they don't have access to it. I heard that some people who went out of Tehran, which has seen the heaviest strikes, they had moved to other safer places in northern Iran near the Caspian Sea. But at the same time, they have to make money for their families. They have to bring bread to their tables. They went back again because they couldn't afford to stay out for longer. But at the same time, I'm hearing some voices of younger people who are saying that right now we are better off without Iranian supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was killed on the first day of strikes. Like when I was having a chat with them on Persian New Year that happened recently, one of them said that I'm really happy because what he said, quote, evil king, unquote, was taken out. But we don't know where it's going to lead now with the third supreme leader. Is the grip going to be tightened or not? But at the same time, some of these protesters, they were saying, we can't take down the regime with our empty hands, and we need someone from outside to help us out. But with what Donald Trump said about attacking energy infrastructures, they're not seeing that as help to them. And that is kind of like mixed emotion, mixed feelings, changing opinions. Every day I'm hearing something new from some of them. And you can't predict how the situation is going to be like when the war is over.
To bring it back full circle, we talked about the way in which this conflict could end, and the just walking away and declaring victory scenario. That would be seen, and I think understandably so, as an astonishing betrayal of the Iranian people. Because let's remember, Donald Trump, he has spoken about regime change, but he's spoken about regime change by calling on the courageous Iranian people to come to the street, take your destiny in your own hands, on a number of occasions. And I remember it when we were covering, Ghoncheh and I were both covering the protests when they happened back in January. And they said, come to the streets, help is on its way. If at the end of all of this, of these numerous calls he's made to say to the Iranian people, risk your life, face down the guns, go to the streets, we're behind you, if at the end of all that, he's not behind them, he is declaring victory and left the Iranian regime in place, well, that will be viewed, I think, as a betrayal on the same scale as that which George Bush the first was accused of when he promised help to the Kurds and opponents of Saddam Hussein and then walked away and they were gassed in their thousands. I think it is a really serious moment because people will have already lost their lives coming onto the street as a consequence of him making that call. And the expectation, I think, and I look to Ghoncheh for this point, the expectation would be that there was help genuinely coming. And if that help has turned up and disappeared again, I think many people will find it hard to forgive that.
That was Ghoncheh Habibiazad from the BBC's Persian service and Joe Inwood, the BBC's World Affairs correspondent. And that's it for this episode. The Global Story is also a podcast. We're available every weekday at bbc.com or wherever you listen. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Cheerio.